Welcome back to News here on the Rise News. Now, in a recognition of tireless commitment and service to the community, Alfred Oyekoya has been honored with member of the British Empire in the King's New Year's Honours List. Alfred, who was recently named by the office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales as amongst Wales' top 100 chainmaker, is the director of the BAME Mental Health Support. Alfred Oyekoya was honored for his role in the mental health advocacy. Mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It is an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, building relationships, and shaping the world in which we live in. This, among other issues, is what Alfred Oyekoya will be speaking to us about. As we say, good afternoon and welcome to Newsday today. Alfred, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to have you guys.
Yes, Alfred, you've been celebrated for your contribution to mental health. And mental health is becoming a very, very big issue. As we get into 2024, let's start it off. Talk to us. Why mental health? And why is it this important at this time?
Thank you. See, mental health is one of the areas in which has gained a lot of accidents in post-pandemic and even during pandemic. But essentially for ethnic minorities, particularly Black people like Nigerians and other African countries, there's a lot of stigma, still associated with mental health. And that's why it's so important we continue to normalize this conversation, creating awareness, letting people know that, it's okay to ask for help, and vulnerability is not a sign of weakness if you really need that support, because early intervention can actually save lives when it comes to mental illness.
Very good, Alfred. Now, realistically, where is mental health support in Nigeria currently?
You will be surprised to know that Nigeria has actually gained a lot of progress when it comes to mental health, particularly from the regulatory framework perspective, because that's the first thing first when it comes to addressing, structural discrimination inherent in laws. So this year alone, the bill for mental health was passed, and it's surprising to even let you know that in United Kingdom, for instance, we're still on that journey trying to reform the Mental Health Act of 1983. So in Nigeria, for instance, there has been a lot of progress from the regulatory framework perspective. And what we need, for example, in Nigeria is more implementation and ensuring that organizations and NGOs and CSOs that are doing a lot of work at the grassroots level are given the empowerment that they need to be able to deliver, what the bill stands for. But in United Kingdom, it's saddening to say that we are still behind when it comes to doing that first thing first, which has to do with the regulatory framework. Because recently, in November 2023, the King's speech that is meant to then set the pace for the agenda of the government when it comes to the laws, there was an omission in that speech regarding what needs to be done with mental health despite several promises. So in Nigeria, there is a lot of progress when it comes to the legal framework itself. But in terms of implementation, I can say that Nigeria is still far behind as well.
All right, you said in terms of implementation, Nigeria is still very, very far behind. But let's talk about the honors you've actually been given and the encomiums that you've been showered upon based on your contribution to mental health in the United Kingdom. Of course, you were actually honored with the member of the British Empire in the King's New Year's Honours List. Talk to us, how did you feel when you got that particular call saying that you've been included in this particular list?
To be honest, it's an exciting, I call it, here I go, my children coming to speak with me. Yes, it's so nice to really be accepted and appreciated by the government, because a lot of work we do essentially is at the grassroots level. We don't even know that it will be seen and visible to the world. But essentially, we have had an influx, from a lot of African communities, Asian communities in the United Kingdom recently. And there has been a lot of challenges that we face when it comes to dealing with the challenges that, health inequalities in the land has really exposed them to. So being honored by the government has really been a very big, it's something I really appreciate, because it has made a lot of difference to the awareness and the publicity of the work that we do. And like I rightly said earlier, when it comes to the law itself, the law needs to change. The Mental Health Act in the United Kingdom is since 1983. So apparently, it is obvious that 1983, 40 years ago, is no longer a reflection of what the society believes.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you were talking about operationally, your activities stems from the grassroots level. So in relation to this, statistically, which segment of society do you think is more vulnerable to mental health issues? We can use Nigeria and, of course, even incidents in the UK as well.
Thank you. When it comes to mental health, it has to do with the triggers. It is interesting to emphasize that there are different triggers for literally different community members. For instance, if you look at the United Kingdom, the issues around immigration, discrimination, racism are essentially big triggers for ethnic minorities in the United Kingdom. So if you look at that statistic that you were asking about, essentially the only people that will be exposed to triggers around mental health distress coming from immigration-related concern will be ethnic minorities, because they do not have, for instance, the right to remain in the UK indefinitely. And a lot of issues around having to wait for home office or changes in immigration laws, or not having recourse to public fund, or having so many barriers to even getting an accommodation or even getting a job. That alone put these groups into disadvantaged position. But if you look at the community as a whole, uncertainty around what is going on in the world, like the war in Ukraine, like the crisis in Israel and Gaza at the moment. So these are the things that kind of affect the whole public as a whole. But specifically for ethnic minorities, which is where our strength lies because of our knowledge of the culturally relevant intervention that these groups need. A lot of issues that definitely affect them are racism, discrimination, immigration concern, and the structural discrimination inherent in laws. So when I say structural discrimination, I'm referring to policies or processes that are meant to be neutral, but they result into adverse outcomes for this group. A very good example could be, for instance, when someone moved into the country newly and they are asked to provide 6-month pay slips before they could get a job. There's no way that kind of person can have that kind of requirement. So you find that a lot of people are being homeless, not because they can't afford to get an accommodation, but because of the discrimination inherent in these laws. A very good example is someone moving into the country newly and they want to apply for jobs, and these jobs are asking them for GCSE results. That's like the equivalent of WAEC, for instance, in Nigeria. But these jobs applications do not give them the luxury of putting in the equivalent of this qualification. Again, that law seems to be neutral, but the reality is that it results into adverse outcomes for this group. Another classic example is the issue of when people come into the country and they can only work for 20 hours per week. And then you find out that a lot of vacancies are advertised at 21 hours per week. So what that means is that these vacancies have literally disenfranchised significant number of the population, particularly international students, from being able to get the quality job that will reflect their aspiration, their experience, and the quality of job that they truly desire. And again, this can be a big distress for a lot of people. So in a nutshell, it really differs. But the reality is that 1 in 4 of us literally have mental health concerns that need early intervention support.
All right, I want to say many thanks to you, Alfred Oyekoya, the director at the Bay Mental Health Support. Thank you very much, and we wish you a happy new year in advance.